I'll go ahead and introduce Andy again. Sorry about that, everyone. Our first presenter is Andy Back. She's the Fine Arts and Humanities Librarian at the University of Kansas. I'm going to pass things over to her so that she can discuss collaborative design, solving undergraduate library navigation.
Okay, welcome everybody. Just to double check, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you all for joining me and tuning in to listen to my presentation, Collaborative Design, Solving Undergraduate Library Navigation. So really what this presentation is about is a collaborative wayfinding project that I did last spring semester of 2016 here at the University of Kansas. And so sort of how it all began was a professor of design approached me and requested that I do sort of a traditional sort of one-shot orientation session for 2 sections of a required 100-level course for first-year design students. The 100-level course largely focuses on the concept of wayfinding, and so during sort of an initial conversation that the professor and myself had, we sort of were talking about the intended outcomes. And we sort of both agreed through this conversation that an assignment using wayfinding to explore the library would be more beneficial for all parties involved. So by employing the students' design skills, their introduction to the library would be more engaging and relate more specifically to their interests. And for myself, participating in the project meant having the opportunity to promote the library and reconsider the library space from the perspective of undergraduate students. So before I go into sort of the project itself and the assignment, I think it's fair to define what wayfinding is. I find a lot of times when I use that term, especially when I'm speaking to non-design folks, they really have no idea what I'm talking about. So really, wayfinding encompasses the information gathering and decision-making processes that people use to orient themselves and navigate through space. So simply put, it's how we get from one location to another. So the basic process of wayfinding involves these 4 stages that appear on your screen, which are orientation, route decision, route monitoring, and destination recognition. So when thinking about a library and how you would apply this to a library environment, if you think about when a user first enters your library, they're confronted with 2 problems: the information problem they hope to address, and the spatial problem of trying to locate resources. So using wayfinding to consider how users orient and navigate through the library environment can ensure that the space is reflective of these behaviors and in turn eases library anxiety. So now I'm just going to show you a couple images of what the library actually looks like. And these photographs were actually taken before this project actually started. And so this slide actually shows you exactly what you see as soon as you walk into the door. And so you're in this central space. And then when you look to the left and you look to the right, you can see the stacks. And so we're just on 1 floor. We're a branch library at the University of Kansas. And you can see it's kind of hard to see the signs in here, but hanging from the ceiling, we have these call number signs, and then we have these other signs that denote that there's folio stacks and sort of regular stacks. So our stacks are actually divided by that central area by size. So on the left of the library are all of our regular stacks, and then on the left are all these folio stacks. So you can see how if you've never entered our space and you're just wanting to browse the stacks, or you have a specific book that you're looking at for, the space, right away you're at this decision-making point. So right away what I find is when users enter our space, they have no idea really what they're looking for. And to make it even more confusing, when you first enter in, we have these compact shelves that are actually where the call number system actually starts. So a lot of times you just get people who wander back and forth. Okay, so the assignment itself was that the first year design students we placed them into groups of 3 or 4, and there were 6 groups total across 2 sections of the classes. And so each group had the same assignment, which was to design a cohesive and comprehensive wayfinding system for the KU Art and Architecture Library. So the professor of design actually introduced the concept of wayfinding and the objectives of the assignment for the first year design students. And then following this introduction, Both classes came and actually visited the Art and Architecture Library, and a lot of them, this was their first time in the space and actually in a university library in general, because a lot of them were only in their second semester and were largely freshmen. So upon arriving at the library, I actually gave each group of students a call number with the title of a book to locate on the shelves. And through varying degrees of difficulty, each group was able to sort of find the assigned book. But the main point of this exercise was that I really wanted the students to start engaging with the library environment, and I made a point of doing this before I gave them further information about the library, because I wanted them to have this sort of genuine first impression before I gave them further information and sort of put my own bias into the assignment. So following this exercise of locating a book on the shelf, I actually gave the students a tour of the library, and I also gave them a quick presentation of how the library had actually changed since it had originally opened in 1981. So besides this central area that you see when you first walk in, nothing had really changed. And the main reason that this space had changed was because of the advent of computers, basically. So there used to be a card catalog in this main space with a bunch of chairs. And of course, then computers came along and there had to be space made. So beyond that, you can see that none of our signs had really changed. Everything was really brown, everything blended in, and even our floor plan was just a simple black and white architectural drawing. So I shared all of this with the students, and then I also gave them a quick overview of sort of common directional questions that we received at the service desk. So the students were sort of aware of other users' perceptions. So they had my perceptions, other users' perceptions, and then their own perceptions of sort of navigating the space. And so after sort of sharing all this information, we all sort of sat down, the students, the professor, and myself, and we sort of discussed their first impressions and sort of had them identify issues to navigating the library space. And so I was actually really impressed. They came up with these 5 sort of main recurring issues. And so the first one was this need to ask directional questions, which stemmed from the outdated floor plan map and general signage throughout the space. They also noted that clear directional signage was needed to aid in navigating the stacks, and there was difficulty locating material due to the layout of the library and unfamiliarity with the LC call number system itself. And of course, I hear this one a lot, that the LC call numbers on the end panels presented an obstacle to browsing the stacks unless someone was familiar with the classification system. And so I'm guessing that a lot of you can relate to this. I serve students who are really visually oriented, and a lot of times they just simply want to look at books, you know, on drawing or painting, or they just come in and they simply want to browse. And the fact that our end panels only really have call numbers on the ends doesn't really lend itself to that sort of behavior. So right away, unless you're familiar with what those LC call numbers represent, you usually have to use the library catalog or ask for help at the desk. So the identification of these issues really also began a dialogue about library anxiety. And the fact that the first year design students really weren't familiar with the library's layout, and the organization on top of the LC call number system left them really confused and intimidated. And I found that just having this open dialogue with all the students about library anxiety really brought camaraderie amongst the students and highlighted the importance of their assignment. So following this introduction, after this whole series of conversations, this was actually, I think this was 2 sessions over 2 days actually. The students had 3 weeks to create a project and to sort of address these 4 issues that they came up with during their visit. And so during this, just in 3 weeks, they had a large amount of work to conduct, and I was actually really impressed with what they were able to pull off. So they had to participate in a mid-project critique. They had to test prototypes of their solutions in the actual library using real users. They had to create a portfolio using photographs and a floor plan of the map. And then at the conclusion of their assignment, they all had to give a formal presentation highlighting their wayfinding solutions to the class, myself, public services staff, and other interested staff from across the libraries. So during their presentations, And these are just some images of the actual presentation day, so you can see that they all had to come up with this really nice poster as well for everyone to look at, highlighting various aspects of their project. And so, of course, they all had really great suggestions. Some were more feasible than others, but each project sort of reflected these commonalities. And so there were these really common solutions, 6 of them actually, that just kept reoccurring. And I should say that these next couple slides are actually images that were created by the students for their projects. And I was really impressed. They actually came into the space, took photographs of the library, and then actually overlaid their solutions on top of them. And so I owe them credit because they were actually willing to lend me all of their images and allow me to keep them and use them for my presentation. So the first solution was clear signage for where to check out and return books. And so again, you can see we just have this like brown signage that's all around, but they really wanted to highlight where someone not only would check out books, but also where you would go to ask for help. The second one was clear signage at our entrance, denoting the library's location in the shared building. So we are actually in the basement of the art museum on campus, and when you first walk in, we have this signage that's above the glass doors, but you can't really read it from the stairway, which I had actually never even noticed because I use the library every day, but they picked up on it right away, and so this was one of their solutions. The third solution was sort of having this large updated and color-coded map on the most visible wall right away when you walk into the library, and then color coding on the map to signify where specific subjects or sizes of items could be located. And so it's hard to see in this map, but each sort of color denotes where you would find things actually on the shelf according to sort of subject. While this is a really great idea, what I forgot to tell them is how often we actually shift our stacks. So in theory, this is a great idea. In practice, maybe not as much, but just something to think about. Also range end labels featuring infographics that represent the subjects found in each section. So they all kind of came up with their own sort of symbols to use. And so here's an example of painting having a palette and a paintbrush, and then text sort of underneath denoting the actual call numbers and further sort of subjects that you would find in that area. Color schemes on library walls to emphasize where to ask for help and directional paths. So you can see like the green pillar would denote a quiet zone. Light blue in this case would be where you would find a regular size book. And then the last one is signage providing instruction to feature visuals over text. So this is just instructions that are sort of visually emphasized on how to actually use our movable range ends. Right now, we just have this simple black and white text, and so that doesn't ever really seem to grab people's attention. So this is one of the solutions to sort of get people to pay attention and quickly emphasize how to actually use the movable stacks. So, of course, many of the group presentations touched on the importance of signage, as you can see, and signage specifically as a communication tool. And they also emphasized, all the students actually emphasized that their solutions would ease library anxiety by making the space easier to navigate without having to ask for help. Additionally, the stacks would be more accessible and easier to browse with simple and clear signage. So the results of this, you're probably all wondering, so what did you actually enact here? Because all these students basically gave me a pitch with all their ideas, and then it was sort of like, okay, well, what do we do with all of this now? So the library, the other art library staff and myself all sort of sat down, and of course we had to think about our time and of course funding constraints, excuse me. So we tried to come up with what we could sort of, the biggest bang for our buck, or what we could quickly enact, and what was the common sort of solutions that came up in each group. And so the suggestions that we ended up enacting were clear signage at the building's entrance, and we've actually gotten really great feedback about this one. A lot of people have really commented on the fact that, especially for the first time, you really can't see that text that you can kind of see it on this glass above, but it's really hard to see unless you exactly know where you are, especially since we are in the shared building. You don't really know when you're on that landing of the stairs which direction to go. The second solution we chose was to sort of update our floor plan and have this color-coded sort of mapping system on the most visible wall right when you walk into the library. And then we took that map and actually made smaller versions of the updated floor plan with LC subject descriptions, and then put that on range ends throughout the space. And so I should note too that this actual final version of our floor plan was created using suggestions from several student groups with their permission, of course, and was actually created by the library's own graphic designer because we had to use university-approved colors and fonts. So, of course, with all projects, there are pluses and minuses, so I just quickly want to talk about some of the challenges and benefits of this project in case any of you are thinking about doing something like this. So each group of students, the challenges first were that each group of students actually created a separate set of infographics to visually represent LC call number subject areas. And some of the designs were easier to interpret than others. So due to the difficulty of understanding some subject symbols, the library staff, we would have to actually pick and choose amongst the various groups to actually come up with one sort of system. And in order to do this, we would have to obtain permission from all of the groups. Another challenge that came up was that a lot of the color schemes that the students chose were actually too close in hue, which was actually sort of a hindrance to interpretation, especially considering someone that might be colorblind. We also had, since all of the students were in all these separate groups, it really made the assignment really competitive. And so after the group presentations, the students wanted me to actually select the work of one group in its entirety and enact it. And so clarification about what I was actually going to do with these projects from the beginning should have been made really clear. And then, of course, you know, carrying out further suggestions, I would need more time and obviously library funding to further adopt these ideas. And the benefits were that the first year design students, they stated that they were more likely to use the library after completing the assignment. The wayfinding assignment really allowed the students to become familiar with library resources and staff and demonstrated how we could assist and were really invested in their academic growth. Also, it's important to note that the students' initial library anxieties subsided as the project progressed. So many of the students were overwhelmed during that initial exercise of locating an item on the shelf. And when they thought back to this, they really were able to recall that having clear signage and sort of understanding what the LC call number system actually meant and the subjects that it represented would have really helped them in locating items on the shelf. And then lastly, for myself and other library staff, the collaboration really allowed us to observe and gain feedback about the library environment from the perspective of students, especially students relatively new to campus. So these insights have really allowed us to begin to envision how the library's environment can be more helpful and more navigatable for undergraduate students. So it really opened our eyes. You know, we're in this space every day, and a lot of the things that they were pointing out had never even occurred to me. And of course, you know, now we have this great new floor plan, and it's on all the range end labels, and I do really notice people using all of our new floor plan maps that are throughout the library. And also, this design professor is now working actually with our music librarian to carry out the same sort of project. So while I would like to have these students return time and time again to the library, of course, now that others have become aware of my project, I have to share them. So in conclusion, you know, the library landscape is ever-changing, but wayfinding, I think, still remains a relevant way to improve user navigation. And obviously, while this collaboration utilized the environment of an art and architecture library, I think that the results indicate, you know, current students' perceptions. And in any case, supporting student skills and listening to student perceptions while actively engaging them in a library orientation is well worth considering in any academic library environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That was really interesting. It looks like we already have one question in the chat from Margaret Erickson. How many students and how many groups participated?
Oh, sorry. There were, okay, so there were 6 groups total of 4 students, so about 24 students.
Okay, cool. If anyone else has questions, please feel free to type them in the chat and I'll read them out loud. I personally was wondering how you initiated this collaboration with the design professor. Did you have like a pre-existing relationship with them, or?
So she was actually a new design professor, and she was very interested in library resources, and just, you know, with any with any professor that's interested in the, you know, has interest in the libraries, that's great from the get-go. So she was actually a new design professor on campus, and she came just to simply get my feedback about doing a library orientation session. And she kind of had come from an institution that just always did like the one shot, here's how you use the catalog, here's how you use databases, that kind of thing. But we just had this informal sort of conversation in the beginning about how we were actually going to make this more relevant to the student's assignment. You know, because a lot of times, especially with the design students, I feel like I introduce them to all these, how to use all these journal databases and how to use the catalog, which is all well and good, but a lot of times it doesn't pertain to their assignment. Right. So I show them this and then they forget about it. So this was just a way to kind of get them engaged in the actual library space, and also to think about how to actually use the library, how they would use the library.
Super cool. I want to steal this idea.
Go for it.
Do we have any other questions? I have another question, actually.
Okay, go for it.
If nobody else has any. You said you have a graphic designer, like a dedicated graphic designer for the library?
We do, yes. So she's part of our marketing department, what we call, actually I think we call it the communications department now. When we went through a reorg about 3 years ago, our marketing person, I think, became our communications person. So basically she's in charge of fundraising, and then underneath her she has somebody who does all of the graphic design and the social media for the library. So basically she is the one that anytime any sort of like publication goes out about the library or any sort of sign is made for the library, it goes through her, just to make sure that we are sort of in accordance with the university template. Basically, the colors and the fonts of everything that we put out need to look a certain way.
Cool, cool. All right. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you so much, Andy. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, our next presentation is Gilda Santana. She's head of Architecture Library and Art History at the University of Miami. I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball over to Gilda so that she can discuss evolving the hometown map, documenting and preserving student work from the School of Architecture.
Hi everyone, can you all hear me? Can you all hear me? Hello, can you all hear me?
We can hear you, Gilda.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Anything back. Okay. Hi everyone, thank you Ariel for inviting me to be a participant in this webinar. Let's see, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. The Hometown Map Project, it's a joint project between the University of Miami Libraries and the School of Architecture. All phases of the Hometown Map were made possible through the creative and technical contributions of many librarians, data curators, cartographers, programmers, communication staff, and administrators. And it's a vehicle for showcasing the creativity of our student body, but it also underscores the diversity inherent to both the School of Architecture and the University of Miami. My initial involvement with the Hometown Map project began, not surprisingly, as a way of providing research support to students. But as time passed, I witnessed the students moving on to other assignments. They would always go back to this one. My appreciation for the relevance of the lesson also grew. And I recognized the impact that it would continue to have over the course of their academic studies. I started thinking that it was a good idea to track and document the pedagogic evolution of the assignment as well. This is a legacy assignment. They've been doing it for 20 years. These are just a couple of examples of some of the maps. The one on the left is a Florida environmental map, and the one on the right is one of our Chinese students, his hometown. My objective for today's presentation is to tell the story of the evolution of the project by deconstructing the layers of intellectual, administrative, and technical scaffolding that led up to its most current manifestation as an interactive global map. That is to say, it's the most techie part of it, and which I had very little to do with other than the idea of it. The Hometown Map, as I said, is a legacy undergraduate studio assignment that dates back to 1977, and it has its roots in the tradition of hand drawing. But because we've been able to capitalize on technological advancements in mapping tools, we have greater access to electronic resources in general, combined with modifications to the exercise over time, the project continues to evolve. And it is articulated in perpetuity through this contemporary graphic interpretation of the universally understood theme of hometown. The research process inevitably reveals new discoveries, which the students then translate into their own visual narrative. I'm just going to flip through some of these so you get an idea of the diversity. The technical requirements for the map creation have expanded to incorporate digital media. However, the original size, format, and media requirements of India ink on a single 24 by 36-inch sheet of Mylar have remained the same. Now, as each project is presented to the class, the studio learns more about the broader issues of architecture and the environment, as well as something new about the perspective on place from each member of the class. The project also serves as a model for the development of richer and more nuanced site studies as students go forward through the school and the profession. Another part of my documentation process includes collecting student testimonials about their hometown map experience. This particular work shown here is by a student, Denise Ybor. Neely was inspired by a quote that she found online that argued that informal settlements should not be disregarded in terms of sustainability, but rather examined for their instinctual patterns of organization and complexity. She continues to apply that theme in her studies, stating that, quote, "After I went through research for this project, I not only fell in love with the idea of exposing myself to such new horizons and ideas that were alien to me, but soon it became an integral part of my life and of every project henceforth." So she continues to use this experience in the work that she's doing currently. Admittedly, when I started this project, I had no long-term strategy in place. I just went into it with all the enthusiasm and determination of the first time IKEA build it yourself customer. And I set out to find 20 years of work based on the Hometown Map assignment. I did not anticipate that the task of analog and digital archaeology that awaited me, and I found myself just foraging through a plethora of documents that were in all types of file sizes. There was absolutely no organization to where or how things were stored, either analog or digital. Fortunately, the ones that I had found had been digitized and stored on the School of Architecture's image server, and that offered me a mass of roughly 250 digital images for me to play with. The beginning of this project coincided with the opportunity to explore the shared shelf image cataloging platform, which was then available to me through the university library. We are no longer using shared shelf, but at that time, the tools enabled me to work out an initial metadata template of around 20 data fields for managing the collection. And it was during this phase of documentation, while reviewing the thumbnails collectively on a large screen, that the concept of a global map began to percolate in my brain. I reached out to Professor Neely, who teaches urban design and planning and data visualization at the School of Architecture, to see if he could help me do some data visualization. Lee's initial rendering of an interactive world map using Google Maps interface boosted the project to a level that would enable further development. This one's very rudimentary, but for the purposes of maintaining manageability during the initial beta testing phases, we agreed to limit the search functionality to 3 fields: faculty, location, and student. Meanwhile, Lee's initial map generated a certain degree of interest by some of my library colleagues. Timothy Norris, the Data Curation Fellow, and Abraham Parrish, the GIS librarian, were brought into the project. At the same time, I was having conversations with the library about the possibility of mounting an exhibition of hometown maps in the new Learning Commons, which was in the process of reconceptualization. I created a proposal for a blended exhibition titled "Where in the World Do Architects Come From?" And the event would serve to simultaneously soft launch the interactive map and introduce the new concept for the Learning Commons. 10 works were selected for the exhibition in consultation with faculty. 5 maps from the 2015 semester and 5 maps from previous years would be juxtaposed with a 60-inch interactive screen. But now with the library fully on board, and for the sake of consistency, the images and metadata were migrated to Content DM, the digital asset management system which the library currently uses to manage the bulk of its digital collections. Mapping the fields from shared shelf to Content DM was a fairly painless process, but the migration revealed a host of metadata errors that we needed to address before going any further. At this point, we also wanted to enhance the online presence of the collection, so a landing page was created within the library's digital collection pages, which is what you see here. So at the first meeting between Lee, Tim, Abe, and myself, we decided to test 2 other web browser-based interactive mapping systems. We built one using Esri's ArcGIS platform, for which the university has a site-wide license, and the other one using Leaflet, an open-source web mapping system. At this stage, I realized that the discussion was almost entirely out of my wheelhouse, so I retreated to the sidelines and I respectfully observed while Lee and Tim and Abe hashed out strategies for the interactive piece. Tim created this chart comparing how well the platforms performed the features that we deemed critical to the project. After testing it, it was decided to use the Esri version due to the ease of implementation and sustainability, and because both the pinch and zoom and the pop-ups worked with Google Chrome on the touchscreen TV. The only difficulty would be to implement the Lightbox JavaScript library functionality and make any design customizations. We also decided to standardize the image scans and to clean the metadata as much as possible. As I mentioned earlier, the process of moving the metadata from the School of Architecture into the test exhibit revealed many errors, which fell largely into 2 categories. First, the latitude and longitude field formats for this information was not standardized. The second major problem observed was that mapping of the file format indicated in the extension of the file name did not map to the correct file. This drew obvious attention to the fact that the image scan files also needed to be standardized. Creating the touchscreen TV interactive hometown maps exhibit involved 3 main technical components: cleaning and formatting the metadata for the map images, standardizing the actual image scans of the hand-drawn maps, and the creation of the interactive exhibit system for the touchscreen TV. And I hope that this digital information flow and housekeeping is, I think it's fairly explanatory. Encompassing these three tasks was the flow of digital information for both metadata and images, which started in the School of Architecture, went into Content DM, and was then exported for use in the map exhibit. To implement the Lightbox JavaScript library and custom design for the exhibit, it was necessary to export the entire web map application from Esri ArcMap Online system to a local server. This facilitated editing the Esri JavaScript libraries as needed for both the Lightbox implementation and the custom design. The custom design was a relatively easy CSS implementation, and the implementation of the Lightbox was a little more difficult as it required some reverse engineering of the Esri JavaScript libraries. I'm going to stop there because I want to show you the actual map, and if you can, please feel free to, as I'm speaking, to go to the site for the interactive map. I can't show it to you right here, but please play with it on your screen if you can. At this point, the system was nearly complete, and we needed to update the metadata and scanned images to include the student work from the class currently being taught. The standardization of the scanned images was fairly easy. The workflow from the prior experience was easy to duplicate. Appending the new metadata to the ArcMap online system proved to be a little more difficult. Esri's online system is designed for quick and easy web mapping, but not for the back end of a long-term project. That said, one of our long-term strategies is to involve the Center for Computational Science with the goal of helping us further develop the project. So then we had a party. The exhibit opened on October 6, 2015 and ran through January 2016. So here you see patrons interacting with the touchscreen monitor. And this is Lee Yi and Abraham Parrish talking a bit about their participation. And as we moved from the exhibit format of the large touchscreen TV, which was not online, to a web-based format, several designs and content considerations came up, as did a few more bugs. Specifically, the design needed to be fully dynamic for phones, tablets, and screens. A little bit of extra university content needed to be included, and the entire online mapping system needed to be vetted for security compliance with website. With the choice of the Esri solution, all of these concerns turned out to be minor issues. The overarching design from Esri was already dynamic, and only a few small changes were necessary to accommodate cell phones and tablets. And there we have the cell phone version. Although it's kind of hard to see it on the cell phone and use it on the cell phone, it's better on the desktop. And I look forward to the continued evolution of the project. And now that it's moved from its static existence and has become dynamic, I'd like to think that the possibilities are limitless as to where future iterations of the hometown map will go. So the experience was a lesson in building partnerships, and it presents further opportunities for taking advantage of existing partnerships with other programs and departments. And I just want one final lesson to be learned was when you start a project like this, make sure that you get permissions before you do anything else. That's just my little caveat, because it's easier to do it beforehand rather than have to go back and get everyone's permission after you've completed your project, and then you have to keep your fingers crossed. Of course, everybody's complied, and the reaction from students is, wow, this is wonderful. So glad you're doing this. But anyway, I hope this was useful or interesting. thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you, Gilda. Very cool. If anyone has questions, please type them into the chat and I'll read them out loud. I have at least one question to start off with. Are you planning, you talked about potential evolving this project in the future. Do you have any concrete ideas? Are you thinking about potentially doing more exhibitions or something else?
I toyed with the idea of working with the gamers, people that are working on gaming projects, because I thought it would be an interesting way to get students to start exploring and thinking outside of the box of architecture. Clearly, there's a lot of places to go, environmentally, politically, many arenas, and I think it's a good example of how one project can become interdisciplinary, but also involve some more computational aspects to it to enable access and maybe make it a learning tool. I don't know how that's going to pan out right now, but that was one idea.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Gilda. That was very interesting. That concludes our virtual discussion forum for today. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us, especially wanted to thank Andy and Gilda for their wonderful presentations. We will be having an in-person discussion forum at ALA Annual this year, so I'll be sending in a call for proposals for that fairly soon. If you have an idea and you want to submit a proposal, be on the lookout for that. And I hope that everyone thoroughly enjoys ALA Midwinter. Thank you so much.